Okay, welcome to another Orbiter 2010 video. And in this video, we are once again here with the Gmax program. So that means we're going to continue working on our rocket. I've been talking to LaRue through Orbiter Forum. Been talking to him in the IRC chat room quite a bit for the last evening and a little bit this morning. And he's just a wealth of knowledge when it comes to this stuff. He, of course, created the HCLV launcher, and he's made the XR3 Phoenix and a bunch of other stuff. He's just really good at this stuff, so he is definitely a person to know. And he pointed out several technical problems with this rocket that I'm making. So I wanted to kind of go back, and I've already fixed most of them in a different version of this rocket. But I know in the last video where I left off, this is about where the rocket was at. In fact, I think this is the exact save state. So I wanted to go back to this version and just kind of go through and work out some of those problems again. A couple of reasons. Number one, I like to document things as I learn them, so I can actually refer back to this video myself. But also, I think people that are kind of following along with this Learn With Me video, you've seen me make the rocket up to this point, so you've seen all those mistakes. And now in this video, hopefully we will resolve all or most of those mistakes. Now let me go ahead and switch the cam over to the big view, and I'm going to do it again where the webcam's off. It's because the webcam blocks the toolkit over here, and it's just as well because I haven't fixed my hair today anyway, so I still have a little bit of bedhead stuff going on. It's not too bad, but it's not looking too good. Anyway, the first issue that I want to mention is that I placed the rocket on the ground. Okay, you can see here, if from this perspective, this is the bottom of the rocket. Obviously, this is the nose cone, and it's sitting on the ground. This coordinate here is the ground. And what that made it so that when we imported the mesh into Orbiter and set our touchdown points, so that the base of the rocket was on the ground, and that actually makes it look right in Orbiter, but it's technically wrong. What we really want, and this is kind of what I actually thought to begin with, is that we want the rocket to be perfectly centered on the X and the XYZ coordinate. We want the rocket to be exactly center in all of that. But if you do that, the rocket would technically sit half below the ground in Orbiter, but we can fix that with touchdown points, and we'll cover that here in a little bit. First of all, let's start kind of by fixing various aspects of our rocket. Now, one thing we want to know is how long is the rocket? You know, what's the distance between the very bottom and the very top? And we can get that information by highlighting the whole thing. That gets all four pieces, and we can group them together into one group. And it doesn't matter what we call the group because we'll just ungroup it here shortly anyway. But if we group it all together into one group, we now can select the properties of that object as if it was one single object. And that is useful because it gives us the y coordinate here, or the y measurement. And the y measurement is 139.9, which is basically 140 meters. So that's good to know. Let's remember that, or let's maybe even write it down. 140 meters is the height of our rocket. Now I'm going to ungroup it, and I'm going to lay down a measuring tape so that we can align our rocket along the y coordinate so that it's half and half. So let's do that. And the way we create a measurement tape, I'm actually just learning this for the first time as well. If you click on the create tool here and then go to tape, and then you click the specify length, because if you don't, then this is grayed out, but click specify length, and then you can put in the length of your tape. And again, we want 140 meters, so that's already selected. Now click pretty much anywhere in here, and then hold down the mouse, and then drag and kind of just let go, and that basically lays down the tape. Now we want to make sure that our tape is aligned so that half the tape is on one side, half the tape is on the other side. So let me go back to the selection tool. Let's zoom in a bit. So we click the tape here, and now we'll click the move tool because we want to move it around. And we want to say, we want the X to be 0, and we want the Z to be 0. But we want the Y part of our tape, we want it to be half of 140, which is 70. So we'll put in 70 and hit enter. And you can see that that moved the tape back a little bit. So now half the tape should be back here. And now let's click on the other end of the tape, which you kind of maybe have to zoom in a bit. And click the selection tool, and it's that blue box actually, which looks to me like it's in the wrong spot. Let me check that. Put the blue box at the end of the tape, and then do the same thing. 0 out the X, 0 out the Z, and then this time we want -70 for the Y coordinate because it's the opposite side. You know, the distance between +70 and -70 would be 140. And I accidentally used the mouse wheel there, which changed that. So let's 70. Now let's go back to the selection tool just to make sure that we're not clicking on anything and zoom out. Now this tape, in fact, let's select our whole rocket and just kind of move it out of the way for a second. So selection tool, move the rocket, move it this way. Oops, I selected the tape as well. So anyway, you get the idea. Now the tape can give us, can tell us basically how far down the Y coordinate we need to slide the rocket. So let's actually click the different pieces of the rocket, because I want to make sure that I don't reselect the tape. And if I just do that, then it's going to have the tape selected as well. So click here. Actually, I think what we might be able to do is freeze the tape. So let me click on the tape here and freeze selection. Now the tape shouldn't be able to move. So I should be able to do this now. Let's test it. Let's move the rocket up. Yeah, that's perfect. So once you get the tape in place, freeze the tape so that the tape doesn't move even if you select it. And now you can see half of the tape is 70 meters this side, 70 meters that side. So now with a very high degree of precision, we can place our rocket along the Y coordinate and know that we have half of it on one side and half on the other side. So we got the selection tool selected, and we'll move it down. We'll just kind of eyeball that part of it for now. Now we'll click that arrow so we can move. Let's select the whole thing and slide it down that way. And we can kind of come down here and zoom way in. And that will help us, make sure that it's positioned basically pixel perfect, like that. Now we know that we have half the rocket on one side and half on the other. Okay, now let's, there's some other aspects, some other technical aspects of this that we need to work out, and we'll do this by selecting one object at a time. So with the move tool selected, let's click the bottom part of the rocket. Actually, with the rotation tool selected, click the bottom part of the rocket, and we want to zero out all the coordinates, because as you're working with your pieces, you might accidentally rotate them, and you might think that that's okay, because who cares about the rotation? But the rotation actually matters. So if we click the rotation tool and then click an object, we can zero them all out. So we'll put in 0 for X, 0 for Y. Actually, I take that back. Clearly, we don't want that one zeroed. Okay, so click of course you have to zero them out per axis. So click the rotation tool, click on the object, and we want to make sure that Y is 0, which it already is, but we'll type it in anyway, 0, enter. And we want to make sure Z is 0, because you can see that it's off a bit. Now we'll click the next object, so rotation tool, and then this kind of piece in here. And we want to have 0 for the Y, 0 for the Z, and we want, I believe, 90 for this one. no, it's, I guess that one's 180. Let me check that one. So that one's 90. That's, anyway, you get the idea. Just rotate them according to their proper axis. Now I'll click on this piece, and it has a little bit of extra rotation in here that it shouldn't have, so we'll zero that out. And finally the fairing, and you can see that it's got all kinds of stuff going on, and that's probably a big part of the problem that I'm having with the fairing. And actually, before I zero that out, let me zoom in on the top of the fairing to show what one of the things we want to fix. You can see here that the top part of the fairing, when we lathe it, it's all screwed up here at the top. Let me go to the modify tool. I actually click selection, select the fairing, go to the modify tool, and if we click vertex, you can see that, you know, this is off. It's not right on the line like it should be. So when we lathe the fairing, it's all messed up here at the top. So that's one of the other technical things that we want to fix. So back to the rotation tool, click on the fairing part. It's the last thing that we haven't fixed yet. And we want to zero out the Y. And we want to zero out the Z. And now we have a fairing that is rotated that way, so we'll fix that. Let's zero out the X as well. Okay, so it's rotated completely backwards. That's going to be the Y coordinate, I believe. No. So this one's the, let me check. It's actually 180 degrees backwards. There we go. So zero out the Y, zero out the Z, and then we'll deal with some of this other rotation stuff here shortly. Okay, now, so those are some of the technical problems. You know, the rocket wasn't sitting in the proper place. It didn't have the proper alignment. Now let me take a sip of water here, and then we'll work on the fairing portion. Okay, as we saw at the top of our fairing, we have this goofy thing here that happened because the lathe isn't set up right. So selection tool, select the fairing part, and then we're going to go to vertex. And clearly part of the problem with the lathe being wrong is that our lines aren't centered on the axis very well, or not at all actually. So if we click the spline, which when you click the spline, it's the same thing as if you click the entire section, that whole line. So you have three things here. You have the vertex. The vertex are the individual points. Then you have segment, and a segment is one segment, and then the spline is the whole thing. So if I click the spline and go to the move tool, on this particular coordinate, we want it to be lying directly. I believe we want to have the whole spline lying on the 0 position of the x-axis. So let's go to 0 there. And I'm guessing we want 0 on the z-axis as well. Just check that. Still looks off to me. What I actually did in my other version of this rocket was I deleted the whole spline and started over because it was easier to do that. But I'm trying to see if I can fix this. Not that it matters, because remaking it would probably actually be easier. But just for the sake of learning, you know, how some of this stuff works, I'd like to try to fix this one. So let's kind of zoom in up here, and we can see that. Let's again click the spline, click the whole thing. And what we want is we want this vertex to be exactly on one of the axes. It actually doesn't matter which axis it is, as long as it's right on the middle of one of them. So let me just click the spline there. That's 0. And let's see what happens if we zero out the X on this axis. Okay, that's not right. So let's move it back. And what if we zero out the y? That's definitely not right. So we'll leave that one there. And this just looks off down here by, it's clearly not lying on the axis. And it seems to be off by 4.421, so let's just zero that out. No, that's not it. Okay, so we'll put it back. All right, let's zoom in on the vertexes and just take a look at what we have. Okay, this vertex, for one thing, it's not on the, it needs to be on the 0 position, so we'll click on that vertex, and we'll just move it by itself. Let me click vertex to make sure that we're only affecting one vertex at a time here. And that needs to be 0 and 0 on the Z. And let's click on each individual vertex and see what they're off by. Now that's fine on the X because that can't be 0 as well. But it probably has to be 0 on the Z. Okay, these are the ones. All right. So let's click the whole spline. And see if we can zero it out on the Z-axis without having to... that's closer, but we'll probably still have to do each vertex. Zoom out a bit, click that vertex, and it needs to be 0 on the Z-axis. And we'll zero out that one. And that one. And this one, you can see what's happening down here. It's straightening it out. And I think that will probably, fix it overall. Okay, that one's still off. And this one. And the last one. Okay, so now all the vertexes on the spline are zeroed on the Z-axis. Let's zero that as well. Let's zoom way in. Something there is not, that one's off, so let's zero that. Okay. So that's going to be the shape of the fairing. And now we have the vertexes, they're all 0 on that axis. So in theory, we might be able to make this work now. Let's click the spline and let's just see what it looks like on the lathe. And I can tell that it's still, something's still off with it. Again, I gave up on it in the other version of this rocket and just remade the whole spline. It was easier, but I'm curious if I can fix it in this version. So let's select the object and let's see how it's centered or not centered. To me, it looks like it's a bit off. So that's running up through there. Okay, but it's really the vertexes that matter, not what it looks like when it's lathed. So let's check these. And there's one other thing that we can do. Let's go to, if we select all objects, and we go to the hierarchy, and we affect the pivot point only, and then center to the object. I've only got one object selected, so let's try that again. Select all the objects. Actually, we might have to do this one as a group. So let's group it together. Now, select the hierarchy, affect pivot only, center to object. You can see that's there. And now down here, we'll manually set all these to 0. So 0 on the X, 0 on the Y, 0 on the Z. So that zeroes out that pivot point. Now let's go to group ungroup and let's take a look at that fairing part again. So selection tool, click the fairing, back to modify, vertex, and just let's look at our vertexes now to see if anything's moved around. Okay, move tool, that vertex. Okay, that's still Z0, I mean. There. These are all where they need to be. And let's zoom way in on the top. And we've actually got an extra vertex here that we don't need, so let's delete that. And that's 0 as well. Okay. So that being the case, let's try to lathe it one more time. And if this doesn't work, we're gonna throw this one out, and we're gonna start over with the fairing portion. I just wanted to see if I could actually figure out where the distortion was coming from. Sip of water. So lathe. And we can see as we zoom in here on the top, it's just something just isn't right with this spline, and it's irritating to me that I can't find it, because I've zeroed everything out, I've zeroed the rotation, I've zeroed the pivot, I've done everything, and I still can't figure out where that misalignment's coming from. So it's not worth messing with. It's easier to delete the spline and make a new one. So selection tool. Select the fairing, delete, and we're just going to draw a new one. Select line tool, and we want corner would be the easiest thing to start with. And we're going to start right up here at the top of the tape. And we're going to go out. Think here, go out again. Actually, let's go out a bit farther. I already messed that up, so let's select that, delete this line, make a new one. Start there, go out a bit, then go out a bit more. That's probably too much. Then go down, and we'll fix these lines here in a second. Go down a ways and go in. And then to get rid of the last piece, just hit escape. Now we will click the selection tool, move, and go to modify line, and we want the vertex, and we just want to work with all these vertexes. The first one here at the top, okay, 0x, that's already perfect, and 0z, and we're going to set the y coordinate. Let's make it 70 exactly, because that's the top part of our rocket, 70 on one side, 70 on the other. Now this one we can straighten out, so let's click this one, and let's make a nice even number. So instead of negative 53, let's make it negative 54 on that side. And then instead of negative 11, let's say let's go negative 8, so it'll be 8 meters out instead of 11. And then we'll click this vertex, 0 on the x, and we'll make it an even number here, just 32. And then we want this to be the same as the other one, which is negative 8, so that it's a straight line down. And then finally this vertex, 0, and we kind of don't really need to worry about it because it's connecting to that piece. Okay, so that gets those vertexes kind of zeroed out in position. So, and you can see that on this axis, it's perfectly lined up. So now let's see what happens if we lathe this spline. And we want to lathe it according to the x-axis, not the y, which is what it was before. And it's all goofy, so let's see what we can do about fixing that. It's lathed on the right axis, but it's but it's picked its center point as something not what we want. Let's unlathe it, go to the vertex. Let's select the whole spline, and let's see if we can pick the pivot point of that. So affect pivot point only, and 0 on the X, and 0 on the Z. Okay, that's the pivot point. And then, no, not center on object. Definitely not. So 0 on the X, 0 on the Z. I don't know that we necessarily want 0 on the Y though, do we? Maybe not. Back to modify. Vertex. I don't understand why it's lathing around that point. How is it picking that point? And it's kind of an arbitrary spot. It just doesn't even make any sense. Let's go back to the hierarchy view. Affect pivot point only. Of course, we're selecting the wrong object, so select that object. Center to the object. And affect object. 0 there. Okay, now it's at least. Okay, now at least that part of it's all centered up. So maybe if we now go back to the vertex, edit the spline. It's wanting to pivot around this point. Okay, let's see if we can move. That's not what I want. I want select each individual vertex. So we want to select here. That's the wrong one. This one. Move these out, and we'll straighten them out more carefully in a minute. And then most importantly, we want that vertex to be, 0 on the X and 0 on the Z. And now if we lay that, it is lathing perfectly on the center point. You can see there. Well, actually, it's not perfect. Maybe we just still have the coordinate off a little bit. So selection tool, select the fairing portion, go to vertex, select that vertex, move tool. It's 0 and 0, so that should be perfectly on the middle. Though this one's off, that could be part of the problem. So 0 that out. And let's see what that looks like. If we zoom way in. It's still not perfect. It's really close, but you can see as we get right in there, this should all come to one single point. I mean, it looks really good from that view, but of course we need to expand the fairing out a little bit to make it bigger. Okay, well, that's going to be it for this video. Let me take a sip of water here. The learning process continues. Still some things about this program that kind of baffle me. I know the thing that's odd is if I delete these two sections, or these three sections here, and just make a spline for the fairing, it lines up perfectly because I've done it 2 or 3 times. So it's almost like there's something about having these extra pieces in here that's making this want to be off, but there's got to be a way to resolve it. There's got to be a way to set this so that the pivot point is perfectly 0 and all the vertexes, are right on the center line, and then this will lathe properly. but there's just still something that's missing here. Something's off. So anyway, again, we're at 30 minutes. So if you like this part of the video, hit the like button down below. And if you like all this mesh editing stuff, leave some comments, and I will see you in the next video.